I'd like to begin by acknowledging the cruel contradiction of asking a humbly raised Midwesterner to get up on stage and present himself as an authority in something. There's no amount of aw shucks humility that can get me through this experience, and that goes against all of my training. Great. That said, I'd like to talk about brainstorming, or how to improve the creative process as it pertains to teams. There's an internal tension to what we're trying to do in a brainstorm. We're asking people to be creative and have a flurry of activity here, while also having a flurry of activity verbally between everybody in the room. So how do you balance that? How do you allow people to be creative both inwardly and outwardly? For the answer, I would like to turn our attention to America's most trusted source of truth, The Onion. For any of you who may be unfamiliar with The Onion, for 30 years it has been a satirical newspaper producing groundbreaking works such as this, this, and this. The Onion has grown into a comedy institution, the likes of The Simpsons or Saturday Night Live, but it never began that way. The Onion published its first issue 30 years ago this very month, in August of 1988, in Madison, Wisconsin. It had a modest print publication, and it was staffed mostly by cartoonists, dishwashers, bartenders, other dropouts. It never had much of a budget to work with at all, and there was no singular genius secretly pulling the strings behind the scenes. The Onion grew to what we know it to be today because these original staffers created a devastating voice and the perfect process for maintaining it. I got to see this process firsthand because my first professional work experience actually came at The Onion. It wasn't actually always that professional, to be honest with you. But it was my first work experience. And when I worked there, my job was to manage the process. So what I'd like to do is share with you how that process works, and then some things I've learned subsequently, why it works so well, and how others can learn from it. To understand how The Onion works, you need to know that every story begins as a single headline. It is their clearly defined unit of brainstorm measurement. There is no general call for ideas. There is a call for 15 headlines. From there, if this represents our staff of writers and they're creative, so let's make that a little more clear by giving them all hats. Great. Thank you. You might have this image in your head of all of them over-caffeinated around a messy table. But actually, the Onion process begins with everybody apart. Everyone's allowed to come up with ideas at their own pace, in their own space, ideally somewhere where their inspiration can strike them. From there, those ideas are brought together onto one list. And because The Onion is dealing with such a high volume of headlines, it actually starts everything with a pre-meeting before the main creative session, intended to kill about 60 to 70% of these headlines right there on the spot. This can be a ruthless thing to endure as a creative, but it's ultimately in service of the meeting. When everybody comes together, you're dealing with only the best ideas. And from there, you can start to pitch and propose what you might want to see and imagine as a full article. Never pitching your own idea, mind you. You imagine how these articles might play out as a full story, and many of them can't. Only 3% of all the headlines survive this process. But those that do are rich and three-dimensional to the staff. They know that they're going to work. By the time they're assigned off to go into writing, it's not to test something, but to realize a potential that everybody knows is already there. So what I want to focus on here are that initial prompt for ideas, the brainstorming alone part, how that influences a meeting, and then how all of that can lead into production, because these are the areas where everybody can benefit from brainstorming more like The Onion. So let's start back at one of these single headlines, but let's think of it from the context of prompting a team for ideas. None of you, I imagine, are needing to start any of your brainstorm processes with joke headlines, but you can all benefit from concise and focused initial ideas. And starting there is really on the person organizing your brainstorm. If they offer up too vague of a prompt, it's going to solicit some vague ideas back. If it's too specific, it's going to suggest there's maybe only one right answer. To find that sweet spot in the middle, think less literally about what the organization may need, be that a new slogan or some new product, and think of it from the user's perspective. Ask an open-ended question like, how might we evoke a particular emotion from our audience? Or how might we get our customers to see an old product from a new perspective? From there, don't be afraid to literally constrain the size of your initial ideas. Post-its can be your very best friend here. You want these initial ideas to be like an elevator pitch for a 2-story building. Getting these types of ideas to begin with are, again, on the organizer, but really all it requires is putting as much effort into the prompt as you want everybody else to put into the brainstorm. From there, you can send people off on their own, and they can start being creative. This is the way that The Onion did it, and this is where they really hit something on the head 30 years ago when they got started, because since then, a ton of science has been done, and all of it suggests that you not only get more ideas, but better ideas if you start them off on their own. And it makes total sense. Think of all the variables at play when you're just spitballing loosely in a room to start a process. You've got Craig, who of course is dominating conversation, because that's what Craig does. Perla's a little shy, Allie's had way too many meetings today, and all the while only one person can speak at a time, so even if you have a great idea, the first thing you have to do is sit on it and wait. These types of brainstorms are intimidating, daunting, and limiting. That's why Isaac Asimov said that creativity actually requires isolation, because creation is embarrassing. Elizabeth Gilbert wrote an entire book on this process called Big Magic, and nowhere in her beautiful depiction of the process of finding ideas does she recommend sterile conference rooms or fluorescent lighting. The design company IDEO in many ways has written the book on the modern creative process. In fact, they've written several. Their philosophy on all this is that it's far easier to rein in crazy ideas than it is to make a cautious idea more interesting. And just ask the partner of any creative person and they'll tell you that the crazy ideas do not come out in public. So that's a lot of evidence for brainstorming solo, but I want to add one more very important point here, because as we continue to seek more diverse workplaces, creating spaces that are receptive to all voices, there's something innately exclusionary about the get in a room and spitball ideas model of brainstorming. Not just because men have traditionally dominated these spaces, because we're working on that, right, guys? Craig, you out there? Yep. But it's a place that caters specifically to extroverts. The rule of play in a room like that is to be vulnerable, think out loud, put yourself out there. But not a lot of people work that way. You can give everybody a voice, it just requires giving them space to find it. So that is why, as adamant as I was that not to put a light bulb graphic anywhere in any of these slides, I implore you not to begin a brainstorm by spitballing loosely in a room. It's a process as ugly as it sounds. By brainstorming alone, you'll get more ideas, crazier ideas, you'll diminish the role of the people who tend to dominate that space, and you'll create more room for introverts, minorities, and anybody else who may otherwise feel pushed to the edges. And that is all in service of setting up the meeting. It can be great. This is what we love, right? But there are two more important caveats for meetings if you want to take this approach to brainstorming. The first comes back to that company IDEO I mentioned before. They have this mantra of embrace failure. If you're creating this high volume of ideas to bring into the meeting and you want to build with them, you don't need to be quite as sadistic as The Onion, but maybe think of that building process kind of like IKEA furniture. There are going to be some pieces in there you simply don't need. This also reduces preciousness among your team, which is another important thing and leads to caveat number 2. And this is another thing that The Onion always does, and I implore you to steal. And that is to detach ideas from their creators. We've all experienced how personal feelings or a personal history, your relationship with Craig, can negatively impact any process. By detaching the idea from the creator, you're eliminating some of that personal history. And number 9 on the list, or that posted up in the top corner, it's not your best friend's idea. It's not Craig's idea. It's just an idea. So all that in mind, we get to the meeting, the fun part. This is what we love. But if you follow all of these steps, you've set yourself up for success. I don't really need to tell you how to do this part. Just listen to each other, collaborate, be respectful. The bigger thing I'm proposing here is kind of this like wholesale emphasis inversion to how you think about this. Do work to set up your brainstorm rather than brainstorming to set up your work. This is the DNA of most creative companies, not just The Onion. At Pixar, they say, let the room ask questions rather than trying to come up with the right answers. My own little twist on this from that IKEA metaphor before would be, let the room build rather than hunt for the right pieces. And this is not only beneficial to the meeting, but this sets you up so well as you move into production because you've started this crucial rhythm, individual creativity and collaborative improvement. And that's the right way to make almost anything. You let people go off on their own and be creative, come together to collaborate. Solo time, then team time. Think of it like this magic idea accordion that's providing the beautiful soundtrack to your creative process, team time and solo time. Ultimately, the creative process that works best for any organization or team is one that matches their culture. This isn't a cookie-cutter situation. You can't just follow something in a book or a TED Talk. But to start in the right direction, you can think of the brainstorm as less of something soft to move in a new general direction, and think of it more like an event. Somebody needs to plan it. Everybody should prepare something in advance. You come together and you share and you have a good time, and you all leave better off for it. So at this point, I hope I've answered some of my big rhetorical questions, but a TED Talk is not truly complete until you overreach just slightly and suggest why this idea is bigger than the confines of everything you've said up to that point. So let me give that a shot. I do believe that we're living in a remarkable moment for people being receptive to new ideas. I also believe that art and creativity in many ways pave the way for what's possible in our society. By letting people experience a better, fairer, more fruitful and more fun means of collaborating, well, they'll start collaborating on better, fairer, more fruitful and fun things for our society. By brainstorming better, it not only becomes more possible, but more enjoyable to create the future together. Thank you.